The Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Protection, and Security Technologies will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to examine how the Department of Homeland Security is fulfilling its important mission of protecting our nation's critical infrastructure. We look forward to examining DHS's capabilities in conducting physical and cybersecurity vulnerability assessments. The critical systems that are essential and central to our daily lives are targeted every day by terrorists, nation-states, and criminals. Taxpayer funds used to protect these systems must be invested wisely and must add value for owners and operators. Because threats to critical infrastructure are numerous and diverse, we're interested in learning about the strategy that DHS efforts is being guided by in this area. I want to thank our panel of experts for joining us so Congress can better understand the work being done in this area and the value of DHS's vulnerability assessments and training. For 12 years, the primary mission of the Office of Infrastructure Protection's Protective Security Advisor Program has been the protection of our critical infrastructure. Protective Security Advisors, or PSAs, are regionally based in alignment with the 10 FEMA regions. PSAs execute their primary mission through the planning, coordination, and performance of security survey assessments and outreach activities to those critical infrastructure owners and operators that elect to participate in these voluntary programs. PSAs also support national special security events, special event activity rating, or SEER Level 1 and Level 2 events, and respond to incidents. The mission I just described is enormous, and because it is voluntary in nature, its success really hinges on stakeholder buy-in. Such buy-in requires strategic outreach and real value added for owners and operators of critical infrastructure. I'm interested in hearing what strategy is guiding this important program and what metrics DHS is using to track and increase such value. In 2014, DHS established the Critical Infrastructure Cyber Community Voluntary Program to help organizations address and improve their cybersecurity risk management. Additionally, DHS created the Cybersecurity Advisor Program, or CSA program, to provide cybersecurity expertise and voluntary cybersecurity programs to critical infrastructure owners and operators. While the CSA program is still in its infancy compared to the 12-year-old PSA program, the CSA mission of assisting our nation's critical infrastructure owners and operators in strengthening their cyber hygiene is critically important. With the passage of the Cybersecurity Act of 2015 last December, we have to ensure the CSA program is also guided by a strategic plan and is well positioned to effectively lead DHS's cyber engagement efforts for critical infrastructure. Last month, this committee unanimously passed the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection Agency Act of 2016 to elevate the functions of our nation's cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection into an operational component within DHS. The legislation recognizes the unique expertise required of both cyber and physical aspects of the agency's mission, while also stressing the importance of enhanced collaboration and coordination between the cyber and physical missions. The Government Accountability Office has reported extensively on DHS's vulnerability assessment programs for critical infrastructure and identified challenges within DHS in 2013, in 2014, and again in 2015. These reports included a number of recommendations to increase the use and to enhance the participation of stakeholders in these vulnerability assessments. One particular area of concern found in the report was federal fatigue, which results from a perceived weariness among the private sector who might be repeatedly approached or required by multiple federal agencies to engage in risk assessments. Federal fatigue is particularly alarming as the PSA and CSA assessment programs at DHS depend entirely on voluntary participation. Just last week, a review of the DHS's website for critical infrastructure vulnerability assessments found conflicting and somewhat outdated information. While errors like these may appear to be insignificant, it's important to remember that these programs are voluntary. And if DHS can't handle basic promotion and marketing of its programs, then I have concerns about the likelihood of private sector participation going forward. The subcommittee believes both the CSA and PSA programs can be of great value for the protection of our nation's critical infrastructure, but a clear strategy, effective stakeholder outreach, and metrics of success are essential. It is the hope of the subcommittee that this hearing will clarify how DHS is working to address these issues. Further, given the relative infancy of the CSA program, the subcommittee hopes to learn more about CS&C's plan to expand this program and would hope that the lessons learned from the PSA program are in fact being incorporated. This subcommittee is responsible not only for the oversight of DHS's functions, but also for ensuring that it has the tools and necessary authorities to successfully meet its objectives. In that spirit, we welcome input as to how we can assist you in this critical mission. The chair now recognizes the ranking minority member of our subcommittee, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing to examine how the department conducts vulnerability assessments for our nation's critical infrastructure. Whether it's going about our daily lives, running a business, or our local government, we all rely on the security and resiliency of our critical infrastructure. As we have seen after disasters like Katrina, Rita, Sandy, or the recent devastation in West Virginia, the ability to recover quickly is crucial. In my district, as in many districts across the country, multiple DHS components and a range of other agencies conduct vulnerability assessments. The Coast Guard in the ports in my district, TSA in airports, and for pipelines and transportation corridors, and DOE and FERC for electrical grid vulnerabilities. Risk assessment involves integrating threats, vulnerabilities, and consequence information, and then deciding which protective measure to take based on an agreed-upon risk reduction and recovery strategy. Within DHS, the National Infrastructure Protection Program, or NIP, outlines how government and the privately owned critical infrastructure community can work together to manage risk and achieve physical and cybersecurity resiliency. It is important to remember that these are voluntary, non-regulatory assessments, and they represent the foundation of the NIP risk-based programs designed to prevent, deter, and mitigate the risk of a terrorist attack or a natural disaster. The DHS Protective Security Advisors, or PSAs, and Cybersecurity Advisors, CSAs, conduct these assessments and focus on coordination, training, and building existing relationships with state, local, tribal, territorial, and private sector partners. This year, President Obama requested additional funds to expand the PSA and CSA programs in hopes of melding physical security with cybersecurity and in line with the Secretary's DHS Unity of Effort initiative. Critical infrastructure vulnerability assessments present DHS and the current NPPD Directorate with one of their most complex challenges, and as GAO has suggested in their testimony, it is not clear that the Directorate has had a consistent and systematic approach for identifying nationally critical assets, assessing the risk they pose, and using that information for cost-effective allocation of resources. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the testimony and yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to have with us today a very distinguished panel of witnesses on this critically important topic. With us today, Mr. Christopher Curry is the Director for Homeland Security and Justice at the Government Accountability Office. Thanks for being with us. Dr. Andy Osment is the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Cybersecurity and Communications within the National Protection and Programs Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security. Andy, good to have you back with this subcommittee. Ms. Caitlin Durkovich is the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Infrastructure Protection within the National Protection and Programs Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security. And Ms. Durkovich, again, it's great to have you back in front of this committee as well. And finally, Mr. Marcus Brown is the Homeland Security Advisor and Director for the Office of Homeland Security for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Welcome to Washington, D.C. Thanks for being here at this committee hearing. I'd now like to ask all of the witnesses to stand and raise your right hand so I can swear you in to testify. Do each of you swear or affirm that the testimony which you will give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. You all may be seated. The witnesses' full written statements will appear in the record. The chair now recognizes Mr. Curry for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Ratcliffe, Ranking Member Richmond, Congressman Donovan. Thank you for having me here today. Today, I'd like to talk about DHS's important but equally difficult mission of assessing vulnerabilities across all 16 critical infrastructure sectors. This is a challenge for many reasons, as you know. Each sector is very different, but many are also interconnected. Also, some sectors are heavily regulated and very accustomed to federal oversight, and others are not. Voluntary collaboration is absolutely critical, as you both mentioned in your opening statements. Most infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector or state and local governments, and DHS needs to collect information to assess nationwide risks. But it must also earn the trust of these partners by using the information effectively and protecting it too. Sharing and trust are also increased when DHS returns the favor and gives information back to owners and operators they can use. In late 2014, we evaluated 10 different DHS vulnerability assessment tools across all 16 sectors. We found that from 2010 to 2013, DHS was involved in almost 13,000 assessments of different assets or systems. These varied from multi-day on-site assessments of chemical facilities to voluntary online surveys used by shopping malls and other commercial facilities. We also found that these assessment tools overlapped across sectors and collected different information and levels of detail. For example, some of the 10 assessment tools collected information on vulnerabilities to all hazards, like earthquakes and hurricanes, while others didn't. We also found that asset names and addresses were recorded differently across assessments. And this simple difference made it difficult for DHS officials, and us for that matter, to analyze whether assessments duplicated one another across sectors. DHS also lacked mechanisms at the time for sharing assessment data across its own components like MPPD, TSA, Coast Guard, as well as with other federal departments. For example, non-DHS agencies like EPA also provide self-assessments to facilities to assess their risks, like wastewater treatment facilities, for example. However, DHS did not have mechanisms in place to better integrate those assessments and avoid potential duplication. So we made a number of recommendations in that particular report. First was that DHS identified the most important areas and the detail necessary to integrate assessment efforts, first of all. Second of all, we recommended that DHS consistently collect and maintain assessment data and share it across components and other federal departments. And this could help them better identify duplication or, on the other end, gaps in the coverage of these assessments too. DHS agreed with all of our recommendations, and I want to give them credit because they've taken action to address them. For example, it's established working groups among components and other departments. It's also considering actual guidance within the department to better coordinate assessment efforts and begun to inventory what other departments are doing. While this is progress, there's still much more work needed to institutionalize these efforts into DHS policies that components must follow. Now, strengthening how DHS manages and coordinates its assessments won't just benefit DHS, but also the infrastructure owners and operators that must use these assessments. When surveyed, they told us, and you mentioned this, Mr. Chairman, and DHS officials told us too, that there is federal fatigue or wariness in conducting numerous assessments. To this end, we've recommended that DHS could really do more to understand why asset owners and operators decline to participate in voluntary assessments. We also found that DHS should more quickly provide assessment results back to owners and operators, which could encourage trust and participation. To be clear, DHS has made much progress in this area since our report. For example, they're now using web-based systems to more quickly deliver results and have cut down on these delays. Lastly, better coordination among components and agencies and sharing of data, as I discussed before, could also help reduce burden on operators. For example, if a DHS Protective Security Advisor has access to all federal assessment data on a particular facility, They have a head start in assessing that facility, as well as information to build credibility with the owner or the operator. And this concludes my statement, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. The chair now recognizes Dr. Osmond for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you. Chairman Radcliffe, Ranking Member Richmond, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My organization within NPPD has 3 sets of cybersecurity customers: federal civilian agencies, private sector companies, and state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. Today I will focus on the Cybersecurity Advisors Program, or CSA program, and our CSAs focus on the latter 2 customers, private sector companies, and state and local governments. The CSA program is modeled after the Protective Security Advisor, or PSA program, that you will hear about from my colleague, Assistant Secretary Durkovich. Although the CSA program does reflect several differences to account for its focus on cybersecurity. Importantly, the CSA program, as you noted, Chairman, is more nascent than the PSA program. While there are over 100 PSAs, as of last weekend, there were only 5 regionally deployed cybersecurity advisors. I say last weekend because yesterday, our 6th CSA started work, a nice milestone for us. Our customers have demonstrated a significant demand for the resources and support provided by our CSAs. For this reason, we expect to deploy 13 CSAs in the field by the end of this fiscal year, and the President's 2017 budget requests a total of 24 field-deployed CSAs. As you know, the vast majority of our nation's critical infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector or by state and local governments. To protect that infrastructure, we must help those owners and operators improve their cybersecurity. Now, people who work in Washington, D.C. are sometimes criticized for thinking that only of Washington, D.C. Our nation cannot afford for NPPD to think that way. We must work across the U.S., helping private sector and state and local government customers where they live. For critical infrastructure owned by small businesses, there's often no other way to reach them. Our cybersecurity advisors are thus NPPD's deployed cyber workforce who live across the United States, helping critical infrastructure where it is located and where the owners and operators live. Our cybersecurity advisors have 4 areas in which they support our customers. They help our customers adopt best practices, they share information, respond to incidents, and support special national security and other events. I'll speak to each of those in turn. First, we help our customers adopt cybersecurity best practices as exemplified by the NIST cybersecurity framework. We do that by advising them on risk management. One of the more concrete and visible ways we advise on risk management is by performing risk assessments. We offer a wide range of cyber risk assessments, starting at the most strategic level and then going down into more technical areas, depending on what a company or other customer needs. For example, our most strategic cyber risk assessment is a questionnaire that can take a full day working with many different leaders within an organization to complete to get a full picture of their risk management methodology. With our current workforce, we average about 80 assessments a year. A few months after the assessments, we survey the companies to see, did the company or state and local organization make a major change based on the assessment? So far, 96% of the respondees to our post-assessment survey have made at least one major security improvement as a consequence of our assessment. CSAs also link critical infrastructure owners and operators to more technical, hands-on assessment teams based in the NCIC. For example, the NCIC can actually try to break into a company. That is, we can try to hack them. I'll emphasize that we do this only at the invitation of the company. Second, CSAs connect companies to our information sharing activities. For example, the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015 has passed, and CSAs are helping us to recruit companies to share machine-to-machine data at real time in our automated indicator sharing program. And let me thank you and the committee again for your help in passing that very important legislation. Third, CSAs can provide support to our customers who experience a cybersecurity incident. When an incident occurs, our customers can work with CSAs to obtain incident response and to coordinate resources and information coming out of the NCIC. Finally, CSAs provide support to officials responsible for planning and leading special events, sometimes known as national security events. Examples of special events supported by the CSAs include major sporting events such as the Super Bowl and Major League Baseball All-Star Game and upcoming conventions. These are the 4 major lines of effort by which CSAs support our customers: best practices and risk assessments, information sharing, incident response, and special events. But CSAs have an additional role, which is to aid and inform our national efforts. For example, a local perspective can be critical to identify which infrastructure matters the most. CSAs use their local knowledge to identify the most critical infrastructure in a given region. Increasingly, they are also asked to bring their expertise into close collaboration as trusted advisors to state cybersecurity planners and emergency management executives who report to the state Homeland Security Advisor. And ultimately, CSAs are also the voice of individual companies in the development of national plans and programs. CSAs provide a local point of connection that helps their customers manage their cyber risk and brings their insight into this national conversation. Although we only have 6 CSAs in the field today, I ask your support in passing the FY17 President's budget to bring us to a total of 24 CSAs in the field. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Osmond. I'd now like to recognize Ms. Durkovich for 5 minutes for her opening statement.
Chairman Ratcliffe, Ranking Member Richmond, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the crucial role that protective security advisors and cybersecurity advisors, or PSAs and CSAs respectively, serve in supporting critical infrastructure owners and operators in their efforts to manage an increasingly complex and dynamic risk environment. NPPD's mission is derived from the recognition that critical infrastructure is essential to the nation's security, economic prosperity, the resilience of our communities, and our way of life. However, the majority of our nation's infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector and by state and localities. And as such, the federal government shares responsibility in helping them navigate a risk landscape that has become multidimensional, covering physical, cyber, and even space-based threats and hazards. To that end, we appreciate your support for establishing a cyber and infrastructure protection operational component within the department and for authorizing the PSA and CSA program. The department's approach to critical infrastructure security and resilience is predicated on building trusted, value-add partnerships with owners and operators of critical infrastructure. We build partnerships at the national level with the 16 sectors to identify requirements and gaps, develop tools, build capacity, and promulgate best practices to manage threats and hazards specific to their sectors, while recognizing the important dependencies and interdependencies that are created by their intersection. But equally important, we build partnerships at the regional, state, and local level, beyond the Beltway, where owners and operators are living the daily reality of this dynamic risk environment. The PSAs and CSAs are responsible for developing and sustaining these trusted relationships and bringing resources to bear to help owners and operators put appropriate security and resilience measures in place, and in the event of a bad day, help mitigate the consequences so we can not only limit the loss of life, but the economic impact and disruption to our communities. We fielded the first PSA cohort in 2004 with the goal of putting at least one PSA in every state. Today, it is a mature program with 102 regionally based personnel, and we've done more than just putting a PSA in every state. Larger states and urban areas are home to several PSAs. In the President's FY17 budget request, we have been asked for an additional 17 PSAs. No week for a PSA is the same. I have had the opportunity to witness firsthand what they accomplish each day in our communities. It ranges from conducting the vulnerability assessments we are here today to discuss, to organizing security campaigns on evolving threats such as violent extremism or substation attacks. It may include active shooter trainings and counter-improvised explosive device workshops, or planning for special events such as the upcoming political conventions. And equally important, as I expect you will hear today from Director Brown, they support state and local critical infrastructure protection activities and provide critical decision support information about disruptions to infrastructure and cascading impacts during an incident. Recent events demonstrate why critical infrastructure must be secure and able to rapidly recover from all hazards. Terrorist attacks and active shooter incidents, both here and abroad, highlight the continuing interest that adversaries have shown in targeting critical infrastructure, the vulnerability of public gathering sites, and they underscore the persistence of those who wish to cause harm, whatever their motive. In addition, the last several months highlight the convergence of the cyber and physical domains. The disruption to the Ukrainian power grid is the first known example of a remote cyber attack that had physical consequences. We know that nation-states are looking to gain footholds into our infrastructure to use in times of conflict. To meet the threat head-on, CSAs and PSAs have already begun to coordinate their efforts, conducting joint physical and cyber assessments of critical infrastructure and aligning analytic resources and assessment methods. In FY15, more than 20% of CSA evaluations were initiated as a result of direct referrals from the PSAs. The Office of Infrastructure Protection is working to develop a 3-year strategic plan for assessments, as required by Congress, which we expect to be completed by the second quarter of FY17. This plan will enable us to clarify the strategic intent behind IP's conduct of assessments, expand the value derived by our stakeholders, and will further guide how the assessments are prioritized and measured. In closing, protecting the nation, our critical infrastructure, our communities, and our way of life is a shared responsibility. PSAs and CSAs provide the local point of connection between DHS programs and our critical infrastructure stakeholders. They are the primary bottom-up capability to help owners and operators better manage their risks, and consequently are the basis for the trusted relationships that have resulted in a national critical infrastructure program that is a model around the world. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions and to working with you to ensure NPPD, or Cyber and Infrastructure Protection, is appropriately organized and positioned to carry out this critical mission.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent that Mr. Payne be allowed to participate in today's hearing.
Without objection, I'd love to welcome the gentleman from New Jersey to our subcommittee today. Glad to have you. Thank you, Ms. Durkovich. Chair now recognizes Mr. Brown for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Good morning, committee members, chairman, ranking member. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to discuss our partnership with the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Infrastructure Protection. A significant aspect of our mission relates to prevention and protection of our citizens and our critical infrastructure in the face of terrorist threats. Many of the ways we maximize our efforts with prevention and protection activities is working with our 3 protective security advisors and our regional director. In a joint effort with the PSAs, we have developed programs that better prepare our citizens by identifying vulnerabilities and improving capabilities that address the threat of terrorism. We follow the National Infrastructure Protection Plan, and we have developed and implemented a state critical infrastructure plan as a component of the overarching Homeland Security program. Together, we have been able to establish a list of the most critical infrastructure in Pennsylvania by collecting, prioritizing, analyzing facilities and assets through meaningful outreach. Our 3 PSAs provide immense value in assisting local, state, and federal officials and the private sector in protecting Pennsylvania's critical infrastructure. One of the ways the PSAs accomplish this is by conducting vulnerability assessments, surveys, active shooter protection walkthroughs of facilities and assets. My staff has accompanied the PSAs on in many of these facilities when they're conducting vulnerability assessments. From our observations, having the owners and operators of these facilities in a room with law enforcement, with emergency medical services, and with other public safety officials always provided one-of-a-kind opportunities for everyone involved to identify the complexities of a facility in terms of physical and cybersecurity. The main tools the PSA uses in their vulnerability surveys is called an infrastructure survey tool, or an IST. The IST is used to capture information about a facility in order to identify the areas where the facility is most vulnerable. After that data is collected and analyzed, a report containing a comparative analysis known as a dashboard is provided to the owner of the facility in order to assist in reducing risk. While the interactive dashboard shows how weak or strong that facility is compared to like facilities around the country, the report also zeroes in on vulnerabilities specific to that facility and provides options of consideration, meaning that these specific actions taken by a facility will reduce its vulnerability and therefore reduce its risk against man-made or natural disasters. Additionally, This information gives local, state, and federal public safety officials a picture of what is most at risk in their area of operations. For example, with this information in hand, the PSAs can monitor critical infrastructure that may be vulnerable during a specific event, such as the upcoming Democratic National Convention in Pennsylvania. The tool used for this purpose is called the Special Event or Domestic Incident Tracker tool. During the upcoming Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia, the PSAs will share the information in this tool with all of the members of our state emergency operations center. And then the EOC will be able to provide me with situational awareness reports that I can then feed to public safety leadership and the governor. From the perspective of my office and the citizens of Pennsylvania, the PSAs and the cybersecurity advisors bring their experience and expertise into play to assist in critical infrastructure protection efforts, and their value cannot be overstated. The tools that they use to assist the private sector facilities are most beneficial to my office, especially during times when my staff has to report to our state EOC during an activation. We value their input and assistance when they are participants with us in our tabletop exercises and training events. What they offer our office is immeasurable to our mission of protecting the citizens of Pennsylvania. We have provided in an appendix a list of the assessments that have been done by our PSAs in advance of the Democratic National Convention. So once again, I would just like to thank the committee for having me here, and I'm more than willing to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Dr. Osmond, I want to start with you. We talked about the fact that as you set up the CSA program that hopefully you'll be able to leverage and learn from some of the lessons of the PSA's 12-year history. One of the questions that I have for you is, can you advise us on the developmental and training programs for the CSAs to ensure that the field-based personnel out there have a diverse cyber experience that includes computer engineering skills, that includes a well-versed knowledge of cyber incident response, and a solid working knowledge of the NCIC and its capabilities and services?
Thank you, Chairman. Let me first highlight what we are looking for in a cybersecurity advisor. Cybersecurity advisors are the risk advisors in organizations. And so if you look at a typical Chief Information Security Officer office, the Chief Cybersecurity Office of a customer, they usually have a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, a policy office, a risk management office, an operations office, and maybe an information sharing office. The CSAs bring in that high-level risk management knowledge. So we do not expect them to put hands on a keyboard and be able to do a technical risk assessment. We want them to bring that strategic perspective. And risk management is really the chassis upon which we build cyber programs, and so it's really core. So right now, let me tell you, in fact, about our 6 CSAs, because I think we have a really impressive group of folks. We have one individual who's a former state CISO. We have a national lab expert on cybersecurity. We have a longtime Navy cyber individual who is also the CISO of a private sector company. We're about to bring on to Houston in the next month a person who was an executive in an oil and natural gas company to be our cybersecurity advisor in Houston. So, and that's just a sample of the great talent we've got in this program. So we're bringing in the right people. To your point, we then have to continue to train them. And so one of the things that we do is we actually look to existing training programs such as, well, actually I won't mention certification programs by name, but there are existing private sector-led certification programs that you use to really ensure that your people have the best risk management knowledge. And so we use those certification programs, plus bringing them in back to headquarters to train them on what's available from the headquarters organization and the NCIC itself.
Thank you, Dr. Osmond. Ms. Durkovich, let me turn to you. As I understand Protective Security Advisor Program has developed a new public outreach initiative. Homeland Security starts with hometown security. You and I talked about that. And I've got this handout that you gave me. This sounds like a great initiative. My question to you is, have you determined any benchmarks or metrics to determine the success of programs like these or other PSA outreach? And depending on your answer, Mr. Curry, I'd like to have you weigh in on your experience with respect to whether there are any best practices for determining or reporting measurable metrics in areas that are activity-based.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for that question. It is a great question. And I want to begin by acknowledging that we are continuing to look at how we enhance and improve our metrics. As you know, most of what we do within the Office of Infrastructure Protection is voluntary, and so owners and operators are not required to participate in our assessments, nor are they required to report back to us what options for considerations they accept. However, we have, over the course of the last several years, begun to do a better job in terms of tracking those options for considerations that are recommended. And we know, for instance, that at least 90% of owners and operators at least adopt one of our options for consideration. We are working to go through the information collection request process, which will allow us to provide surveys and questionnaires to our owners and operators to more effectively understand how useful the value that campaigns such as the Connect, Plan, Train report initiative are bringing. Once we have that information collection request completed, again, we will be able to actually hand out surveys and get their direct input. We do this right now for the Office of Bombing Protection within IP and many of the counter-improvised explosive device training courses that we offer. And we know, for example, that our owners and operators rate most of our trainings 4.7 out of 5 stars. So that's an encouraging statistic. Some of the metrics is anecdotal or qualitative, I should say, and it is based on the participants that come to our workshops. We have recently rolled out a updated version of our active shooter workshop that is focused on developing an emergency action plan for owners and operators in the event of an active shooter incident. And I will tell you, having participated in one in Philadelphia a month ago, the room is overflowing. Again, some of this is just based on the feedback that we get directly, whether it is from Homeland Security advisors, from owners and operators, in terms of the value that we have brought in helping them understand the range of threats and hazards and the measures that are appropriate for their operating environment. Not every business, shopping mall, movie theater can put mags in, can do the things that you have here when you enter into this building. And so part of what we do is working with them over time to develop that plan and to ensure that the appropriate measures are in place. But it is an area that we recognize that we have to continue to work on, and it is why we are working diligently to complete the 3-year strategic assessment, which will, again, give us a better foundation for the metrics that we collect.
Yes, sir. So I agree with everything Ms. Durkovitz said at the end. I would sort of make 2 points. One, and you know, data sharing and data collection is not an exciting topic, but I think that is the key first step, is that there were so many assessments that have already been done and so many tools out there and so much data that's been collected, is first looking across all of this data to see what we first have. One of the problems we identified when we actually tried to look across all that information was that there may have been similar information collected in different assessments, but just asked in a different way. So it wasn't consistently collected, and you could not compare it across sectors, across facilities, and all that kind of thing. And that makes it really, really difficult to identify priorities across the country. But I also want to make the point that, this is really difficult. You're dealing with 16 individual unique sectors. Each sector has to have unique, tailored questions to it, but there is a way to collectively do this. I do want to make the other point, though, that There are certain programs where DHS is a little bit more involved in the actual assessment and follow-up, like the Regional Resiliency Assessment Program, where DHS goes out with state and local partners and other federal agencies and assesses regional risks and resiliency. One of our past recommendations is that they better follow up on that to see what mitigation actions were taken and how that actually decreased vulnerability. So you can quantitatively look at that issue too.
Thank you, Mr. Curry and Ms. Durkovich. My time's expired. The chair now recognizes my friend from Louisiana, the ranking member, Mr. Richmond.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And this is to Director Brown, and it's also a follow-up of some things that you mentioned in your testimony. In your experience in Pennsylvania, and especially in light of the upcoming Democratic convention, how are critical infrastructure owners and operators taking advantage of the vulnerability assessments performed by PSAs and CSAs, and are they actually adopting the recommended countermeasures and security controls, one? And then two, in your opinion, have these assessment programs been noticeably beneficial? And if not, what would you suggest to improve them?
First, I'd just like to take a step back from the DNC. Last year, we had the papal visit in Philadelphia also. Again, probably the largest NSSE event that this country has ever seen. And I think and again, I sat on the executive steering committee for that, and so oversaw a great deal of the security planning for the event at all levels, local, state, and federal. And the PSAs played a very important role in what we were doing there. You know, and that was in several ways. One, the assessments that they did, they'd done a significant number of assessments in the Philadelphia area for that event, leading up to that event, and then again prior to the DNC. And those facilities, when we did tabletop exercises, many of those facilities came into a component of the exercise. And the fact that we had security assessments done, and more importantly, actions taken as a result of those security assessments to make those facilities safer, I think played a big role in the level of protection everybody expected at those locations, and then how we felt about our preparation for the events. You know, in each one of those events also leading up to them, and including the DNC, you know, our PSAs also assisted greatly in training preparation for those events. They had active shooter training, they had vulnerability facility training, they had IED training, they had surveillance detection training. So it goes beyond just the assessments themselves. When they do the assessments, they see that there are certain vulnerabilities, and then their training comes in behind that to ensure that we're looking at those things and trying to solve some of those problems. My thought is that they play an important role working with public safety to ensure that the facility and the location and the events that we're putting on, especially the ones coming up here in Philadelphia for the DNC, I think we're in a much safer position now as a result of their work.
To the panel, and I think that I'd be interested in the response. GAO reported that Coast Guard, Protective Security Advisors, and TSA field personnel have reported observing federal fatigue or a perceived weariness among critical infrastructure owners and operators that have repeatedly been approached by different federal agencies and offices. What's being done to address this, both within the offices of infrastructure and protection and cybersecurity and communications, and externally in regards to other agencies? And is it something you all notice and see?
I'm happy to start with that question, and thank you. It is a great one. I do want to begin by mentioning that we have moved to a single assessment methodology within the Office of Infrastructure Protection, in part because of the work that GAO has done in identifying some of the challenges behind having multiple assessments. So over the course of the last several years, we have again moved to a single assessment methodology. That assessment methodology is housed in something called the IP Gateway, which really serves as the chassis that underpins our entire suite of assessment tools, our integrated situational awareness, and our integrated planning tools. The IP Gateway now is used not only by DHS, but by many of our federal partners across the departments and agencies, and equally important, it is used by every state and often in urban areas to conduct these assessments. But I think that your question raises why our efforts to continue to move towards operationalization and to enhance our efforts out in the field, in the regions, is so important. Part of the reason that we have established an IP senior leader in every region is to ensure that we are coordinating more closely than ever before with our federal partners, with our state partners, not only in the conduct of assessments to ensure that we are not duplicating efforts, but equally important that we are coordinated in support of special events and incident response. We have seen the dividends already play out in the regions. I think that we, again, are doing a much better job in limiting duplication. And so as we continue to move to getting additional resources out there, I think that we will continue to see the benefits from this.
Anyone else wanted to comment?
I'll just chime in and highlight that this is one of the strengths of having the PSA program and the CSA program closely coupled, is the CSAs, the cybersecurity advisors, coordinate with the PSAs, protective security advisors, to make sure that their activities are aligned, and really look to the PSAs to be the core relationship manager in a given region.
And if I could just make one final comment, I think the security assessments that are done play an important role, but when we couple them, our office has a huge part of what we do is put on tabletop exercises. So when we can couple that assessment with an actual exercise, we all of a sudden now are the facility is now testing what they got in their assessment in an exercise to ensure that the implementation of it, that the surrounding public safety officials are all on board with what the assessment is saying and then how best to protect the facility. So I really think the coordination of both of those things has played an important role in Pennsylvania, especially for some of the large events we've had.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I don't want you to think that your testimony caused the chairman to lose his hair, get a little bit older. He had another commitment, and he's asked me to assume his role. The chair is going to recognize other members of the subcommittee for 5 minutes for questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. In accordance with the committee's rules and practice, I plan to recognize members who were present at the start of the hearing by seniority on the subcommittee. Those coming in later will be recognized in the order of arrival. We alternate Republican Democrats. Since I'm the only Republican left, I will ask your questions for 5 minutes. Mr. Curry, you've testified before this committee before. I thank you for coming again. You had many suggestions during your testimony on how DSH can gain the trust of the private sector, the private owners, and how your suggestions can decrease federal fatigue that these people are experiencing. Why haven't we done anything about it? You had great suggestions. I thought your testimony was wonderful. Why haven't we done it?
Well, I think we have done a better job in recent years, no doubt. And I think there's two keys to this. I mean, and folks talked about it. I mean, one is local relationships. There has to be local relationships in these areas, and that's really important. It's also really difficult to measure how good that is, but it's key. One of our key points, and again, not the most exciting topic, but data sharing and data consistency across so many different assessments is critical. If a PSA has reviewed information on assessments that have already been done of a facility, they go in not just informed for their own jobs, but they go in and it lends credibility with the owner and operator. They also, if there's consistency across questions, especially in the same area, they also don't have to ask the same question a different way that the person may have been asked 3 months ago by the EPA, for example. So I think both things are absolutely critical.
And do you think that, and you're seeing a result, an increase, a change? I mean, the program's been going on for 12 years now.
Well, sir, to be fair, so we issued our report in 2014, and DHS has done a lot since that time. She mentioned the IP gateway, which is basically, you know, a web-based tool where people don't have to hand out paper assessments and read them. Everyone can go in and have access to certain information. And we think that's good progress. But what we don't know, because our work is a little bit dated, is, you know, we surveyed owners and operators at the time. We would have to go back and actually talk to them to get their perspectives, and we haven't done that. So that may be a better question for Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown? It's tough when another witness passes the ball.
Sorry to punt.
You know, I would say one thing about the number of different assessments that are done. You know, the agencies that are doing those assessments have very, very high expertise in that certain area. So they're assessing a location or a facility where that type of assessment is probably very important, whether it's the Coast Guard, whether it's environment. You know, they're assessing a certain business or a facility where that part is critical. So, you know, the concern for us always is the last thing we'd like to see is a watered-down assessment that sort of fits everybody. So, you know, I think there's sort of a balance in you know, what's been reported here compared to exactly what's going to work out in the field. You know, if it's a maritime facility, we would like to see specialists in the maritime arena be the ones doing the assessment. So I would caution there should be some balance as we move forward on this to try and make a single assessment that fits everybody, or ensuring that we have a comprehensive assessments for each individual sector. Because when we have had exercises where multiple assessments have been done, you know, we do get some specific input from each of those assessments that helps us sort of move forward in the security plan.
And, sir, I would absolutely agree with that, too. And we're not suggesting that there be one single assessment to apply to all 16 different sectors. I think, you know, I absolutely agree. I think what we noticed in our work is that there was a lot of information collected across a lot of different assessments and sectors that was the same but different. It was collected differently, and it could have been used differently if it was collected consistently and analyzed across sectors. And of course, there has to be subject matter expertise, and that's why the Coast Guard, for example, does port security inspections instead of NPPD, for example.
Just for all of you, is this well-spent money? I know, Ms. Dershowitz, you said that it's a voluntary program. People have to, because they're private sector, have to volunteer to participate. We're spending a lot of taxpayer dollars on this. Do you feel, each of you, that this is worthwhile effort and we're achieving the goal that we set out to achieve when the program began?
Thank you, sir, and I'm happy to start with that question. My answer is unequivocally yes. As I alluded to in my opening remarks, we are living in a very dynamic and complex risk environment. And at the end of the day, our reliance on critical infrastructure is really what, you know, drives our way of life. And helping owners and operators navigate this environment and manage the risk is really the essence behind our program. And so our ability to do these assessments, to share information with them, to make recommendations on how they can improve their security. And the reality is you cannot operate in this day and age without having some sort of security plan and some plan for how you're going to bounce back in the event of an incident. And so that is the value that we bring to them, a no-cost assessment that helps them understand where they compare to others in their sector or subsector, and the return on investment that they will get if they make certain enhancements in security and resilience. So I will tell you, absolutely, it is taxpayer money well spent. We have saved lives. We have limited disruptions to critical infrastructure. I do want to just speak briefly to the different types of assessments, and we have this, you know, this reality in the Office of Infrastructure Protection, where we actually have the authority to regulate high-risk chemical facilities. There are about 3,400 facilities that we have deemed high risk because of quantities, threshold quantities that they have of chemicals of interest. So we have a special program chemical security inspectors who are responsible for helping that facility develop a site security plan and ensure that those chemicals are well protected. Our chemical inspectors work closely with our PSAs to ensure that we're not duplicating efforts, and that in addition to a CSI showing up on site, that you don't have a PSA then knocking on the door and saying, hey, do you want an assessment? We have learned, though, and this is where the work that we are doing in the field to better coordinate our activities is so important, that even though you may be a high-risk chemical facility, you still have the need for some of our other voluntary services, whether it be active shooter training, many of, again, the kind of voluntary programs that we do, participating in exercises at the state and local level, ensuring that we are accounting for you in NSSEs and the such. So I think that the earlier comments about the need for specialized assessments is true as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for the incredible difficulty of the work that you do. I believe that both Mr. Langevin and I have been working on this, both from the Armed Services Committee and from the Homeland Security Committee. He has ranked for a while with respect to cybersecurity on the armed services, and I ranked earlier on that. And of course, we've been very involved here on this issue on Homeland. And it's at times just overwhelming, as you know, trying to figure out how we safeguard what we need to safeguard. So I have only one question. Because we have really, and I have believed in this, sort of kept a hands-off method in ensuring with our third parties, those who own our very critical infrastructure, 90% of which really sits in these third parties' hands, we've really attempted to stay short of regulations and plying on red tape and in an effort to keep costs down so that they might be able to better use those funds that they would otherwise spend to enhance the security of these structures. And we've had both small businesses who've been, who are contractors to some of these larger infrastructure pieces, very engaged, and we've had, of course, many larger companies engaged. But we also have had a set that have declined to even tell us what they're doing or what they might have, ask us to come in and take a look from an expert standpoint to maybe help them. What can we do to engage those who are still outside of what we are doing? That would be my only question.
Thank you, Representative Sanchez. I think that's really a fundamental question for us all, and I really appreciate your putting your finger on it. The key question here is in a world where we work voluntarily with companies, how do we get them to engage? And I'll tell you, on the cyber side, and I think the same is true on the all-hazard side, having a local, regionally deployed presence is critical. Because ultimately, companies work, or small and medium businesses or state and local governments, they work with the federal government when they have a trust in the federal government. And we build that trust through having people who are living where they live, working where they work, and really providing value to them, making it real that the federal government has services to improve your company's security, your local government security. And we do have those services. And so having these cybersecurity advisors on the cyber side, living and working with our customers has been incredibly important. And as you know, I mentioned earlier, right now we only have 6, and we're really looking for the Congress's support to increase the number of those field-deployed cybersecurity advisors in the 17 budget.
Just a minute. I would agree with my colleague, but I would like to add one thing, and I think it is an important component of the assessments that we do. But when we work with owners and operators to evaluate their security posture, one of our sayings is you're kind of only secure, you're only as resilient as your weakest link. And we encourage them to look across their entire supply chain, to have conversations with their suppliers, to recognize where their key dependencies are, whether it is power, whether it is water, whether it is communications, and to, at a minimum, have conversations with those key dependencies, with those key third-party providers about what their security plans are. But equally important, and I think we're seeing this more in the cyber realm than we are in the physical realm, but is ensuring that as you develop relationships and contracts with those third-party providers, with those in your supply chain, that you are making security, that you are making resilient a key part of that agreement between your organizations, that in some ways we are pushing the need for security into that supply chain.
And Congresswoman, I apologize. Can I add one additional point? My apologies. I think one other key aspect of this is actually the legislative protections that you, the Congress, have given us for protecting the information our customers share with us. And I'd highlight two in particular: protected critical infrastructure information, which means that when a company shares vulnerabilities or their risk profile with us, we can, statutorily, we protect that information. We cannot give it to a regulator. It cannot be accessed through Freedom of Information Act or other state Sunshine Act laws, and it cannot be disclosed in civil litigation. That protection is critical, and we treat information we receive under that protection extraordinarily carefully. And then obviously the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015 also gave us additional statutory protections for cybersecurity indicator information, and those protections are also extremely important.
And if I could just weigh in, from the field, what we found out is that the more the assessments and the training is done, the more you have other facilities wanting the training. So when you have several hospitals in a city or a locale that have done the assessment, the next thing you realize, you start getting calls from the third hospital saying, hey, I understand these assessments were done. We would like that to have happened. The same thing is happening with the minor league baseball stadiums in the state of Pennsylvania. We've done the Phillies stadium. Now several of their minor league stadiums are asking for an assessment done, followed by a tabletop exercise, so that it's sort of a snowballing effect. The more we are doing these type of things, I think the more the industry is asking for them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also thank the ranking member for allowing me to sit in today on a very important topic. And in my work as a ranking member on the my subcommittee that deals with Resilience and Communications, this is something that I've been very interested in and have advocated the administration on. And, in 2013, the National Infrastructure Protection Plan focuses not only on the security of the nation's critical infrastructure, but also its resilience, which is something that I've dealt with a great deal. What training and technical assistance is DHS providing through the PSA and CSA programs to increase resiliency of our critical infrastructure?
I am happy to start with that question, Congressman Payne, and thank you. Let me talk. Thank you very much. Over the course of the evolution of our program, we have moved from a security focus to a security and resilience focus because of our recognition of the importance to work with owners and operators to be able to return to normal operations in the event of an incident. Resiliency has become a very key part of the vulnerability assessments that we do. And of the 1,400 questions that are part of the infrastructure survey tool that Director Brown alluded to, a number of them cover resilience-related measures. And again, that ranges everything from, do you have a business continuity plan in place? Do you have route diversity when it comes to your communications? Do you understand who is providing your electricity, your water in the event of a power outage? Do you have a generator? Do you have enough fuel to fuel that, generator for at least 72 hours, if not longer? So again, those types of questions are considered in the IST, and we give an owner and operator the ability to see where they stand from a resiliency index compared to others. And if, for example, they didn't have a business continuity plan, but they developed one, how that score would improve. Equally important, a cornerstone of the Office of Infrastructure Protection has become our Regional Resilience Assessment Program. This is where we look at a key industry, a key critical infrastructure asset. In New Jersey, for example, one of our first Regional Resilience Assessment Program projects was focused on Exit 14 and the concentration of petrochemical plants that you find at that exit and their dependency on water, on electricity, on communications, the importance of the port in the area. And we both evaluated what were the threats and hazards that could disrupt or cause some sort of incident at that port, but equally important, how do we work very closely not only with the owners and operators, but the state and the local authorities to improve the resilience of all of those underlying systems and assets. It is a regional resilience assessment program that continues to see value. It has been the basis for a number of different exercises. The state of New Jersey actually created an app based on that RRAP. It is the foundation. Recently, we looked at a Category 1 hurricane coming up the southern tip of New Jersey, and really the relationships that exist in that region were because of this RRAP that we did in 2009. So resiliency has become a key piece of what we do in the Office of Infrastructure Protection.
Good old Exit 14. I live 4 minutes from there, and that area has been called the 2 most dangerous miles in the country based on the airport and the seaport, the chemical and the infrastructure. So these issues are very important to me. And how has DHS incorporated the concept of resilience into their vulnerability assessments?
Again, it is both through some of the questions that I alluded to, but looking at really an organization's or an industry's or a particular region's kind of operational capability and what is a minimal time of disruption that particular organization, that particular community can sustain. And that's really kind of what drives our concept of resiliency.
Okay. Thank you.
I would just note, sir, that our cybersecurity most strategic risk assessments are in fact resiliency assessments.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate your indulgence and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. I'd just like to recognize that I live 10 minutes from that exit, so keep up the good work. The chair now recognizes Mr. Langevin from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the chair and the ranking member for holding this hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses for your testimony here today and the work you're doing to protect the country. For Secretary Ahmed and Durkovich, so I appreciate the desire to incorporate cybersecurity into risk assessments, particularly as more and more systems are connected to the internet. So as a member of the Armed Services Committee, I recognize that today's conflict, and really all future ones for that matter, are going to contain some type of a cyber component to it going forward. And it seems prudent to extend that mindset to critical infrastructure. So with that in mind, Secretary Ahmed and Secretary Durkovich, can you talk about the training required for PSAs to provide these assessments? While Chairman Radcliffe asked about CSA training, it seems that since they're outnumbered by 20 to 1 at the moment, I imagine PSAs are required to do the baseline assessments And basically, it would seem that much of the expertise is different from the physical security that, that traditionally has been the domain of PSAs.
Thank you very much for that question. And as you alluded to, we see the protective security advisors as force multipliers in this effort to secure our critical infrastructure from cyber threats. As I alluded to in my opening statement, over 20% of the referrals to the CSAs actually come from the protective security advisors. And this is because we have these long-standing relationships that we have developed with owners and operators. And in addition to being worried about natural hazards and terrorist threats, they are also dealing with, again, the range of cyber actors. So at a minimum, what our PSAs do is connect them with the other NPPD cyber security expertise. That may be the NCIC, that may be the cybersecurity advisors. But we also are bringing tools and capabilities. We have a number of self-assessments that are available to owners and operators on the cyber side of the house, and as well can articulate kind of that basic cyber hygiene. So to ensure that our PSAs at least know enough to be dangerous on the cyber front, and this is something that in my role I've had to do as well, right? It's hard for me to go out and talk about this dynamic risk environment and not include cyber in that conversation.
I just want to ask to clarify. So are they just doing referrals to CSA or to other entities, or do they actually have training in that area on the side?
So they are largely doing referrals. They do kind of general awareness about the threat. They can talk about kind of basic cyber hygiene, the importance of multi-factor authentication, of segmenting systems. We have sent, but to answer your question, we have sent all of them down to Hoover and the Secret Service cybersecurity campus there to get a basic level of training. There are some protective security advisors who have spent time at Idaho National Labs with our industrial control system team, getting kind of a higher level of training. And we have only a few, but this is while Andy works to build up his workforce, that are actually certified to conduct our cyber infrastructure survey tools. So it's a mix of...
So where do you see the workforce going on the CSA side? Because it seems to me that you'd almost want the two to be co-assessing or co-locating and conducting these assessments.
Sir, I think of this as a sort of three-tiered system. We have the PSAs who can do advertise our cyber programs, connect people with our other cyber resources, and do basic. For example, as part of their basic infrastructure survey tool, they do have strategic cyber questions there, and they can give high-level advice on cyber hygiene. When we have a problem that demands more cyber knowledge than that, and a lot of our customers are demanding more cyber knowledge than that, we go to the CSAs. And the CSAs provide, our cybersecurity specialists, but they are not hands-on technical operators. They are cybersecurity executives, if you will. And so then, at the next and final tier, when a customer needs more technical, specialized assistance, we draw then upon our different technical groups within the NCIC, whether it be the industrial control systems team, or an incident response team, or a hacking team, if you will. And so we start with that broad base of PSAs who, as you note, there are far more of them, and they have these relationships. When we're in a region, the CSA and the PSA have to be very tightly coupled, and they are very tightly coupled, so that the CSA can draw upon that PSA's knowledge and relationships.
So where do we see the CSA workforce going? Is that you working to increase that so you have more of a balance with the PSAs, or?
Yes, sir. We do very much need to increase that CSA workforce. The demand is just huge. And so we will absolutely increase it. I don't know that we'll reach as large as the PSA workforce. I think some of that is we have to see how the demand evolves. But we are very much asking for an increase to 24 CSAs in the field in the FY17 budget.
Okay, thank you. I hope we're going to concentrate on that more. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask that you respond to those in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee now stands adjourned.